It's more important than ever to keep an eye on retirement.
Hi, and welcome into Eye on Retirement, the weekly show that keeps you in the know about all things retirement. I'm your host, Trey Bassa, and today we're talking about building blocks of retirement. That's exactly why we've gathered a team of professionals for this episode. Today, our panel includes Danny Goolsby, financial advisor and founding partner of Market Advisory Group; Joshua Sikora, CPA tax advisor from Market Tax Services; Alex Robinson, estate planning attorney from Eidelman Law Firm; and Mark Benefiel, health insurance advisor from Market Medicare Advisors. Welcome in, everyone. Glad to have you. Now, Danny, we talk all the time about building a retirement plan. How do you start that conversation?
Well, if you look at someone who is trying to build a retirement plan, whether you're in your 40s or your 50s, or if you're in your 60s or later, the purpose of a retirement plan is to ensure financial stability. Make sure that you have peace of mind. The peace of mind is worth a whole bunch when it talks about you separate from an employer where you've been getting your paycheck from, your stream of income comes from your wages from your employer, and all of a sudden you're no longer getting that. Where's your source of income coming from? So a retirement plan coordinates the income. Where's your income going to come from? It coordinates the taxes, it coordinates the health care, and it coordinates legacy goals. You may have some legacy goals, whether that's charitably inclined to an alma mater or a church or something like that. So the importance of integration, each element affects the others. You need to make sure that if I do something over here, what happens over here down the road, whether that affects me today or tomorrow. You want to make sure that you avoid costly gaps and overlaps in your planning. So let's start with talking about income, because that's basically where we all live. We all live with income, and where's our income going to come from? And so the income planning is an element of a good plan, but you have to determine where your retirement income is going to come from. You may work for an employer that has, a pension. You may have, most of us will have access to Social Security unless you are that small percentage of the population that doesn't pay into Social Security. So most of us will have Social Security as a base, but then you want to start looking at your income. Where's my necessity of expenses, and what's my discretionary of expenses? Sometimes, I don't know about you guys at home, but I got in a bad habit of eating regular, and so I would say groceries would be one of the necessity things. But you want to make sure between necessity and discretionary. But then you also want to talk about, all right, where's am I accounting for inflation? Am I keeping up with where things are going today? During the age of COVID, right after COVID happened, inflation almost hit double digits officially reported. And so if that happens, inflation can be a very big wrecking ball to your retirement plan if you don't account for inflation. And how are you going to tackle that? The next thing you want to identify where those incomes are going to come from. As I said, Social Security is going to be a major portion for most of us. But then beyond that, and Social Security was never designed to pay all of your income streams during retirement. It's always been maybe to be a building block. There's that building block. So besides my Social Security, when's the best time to take my Social Security? Do I take my spouse's Social Security? What happens if I'm a widow? What happens if I'm divorced? Those kinds of questions with Social Security. But then from there, you may be able to be fortunate to work for an employer that still has a pension or some sort of retirement plan. You may be a state or a federal worker that has a pension. You may you may be a long-serving employee at one of your employers, or one of the employers around town that still have a pension. I can tell you, after doing this for almost 40 years, pensions are going the way of the dodo bird. So they're almost a non-thing anymore. And so what that means is this shifts the responsibility back onto your shoulders and things that you must be responsible for yourself. You can't rely on what your employer is going to do for you during retirement. So where's my income going to come from? You may have farm income. You may have rental property. So you need to make sure that you package all of that together and say, here's how much money I need in retirement for my discretionary and necessities. Here's where my income is going to come from. But then you want to start talking about withdrawal rates. So withdrawal rates may sound like it's a pretty elementary statement to talk about, but really it's actually where a lot of these plans can go wrong. Because if you over withdraw, especially in the early part of your retirement years, then that can affect what happens down the road for your piece. And then, so there are three different kinds of money, and Josh will get into this a little bit about taxes, but there are three different kinds of money that people can accumulate for their retirement. And that's number one is taxable, number two is tax deferred, and number three is tax free. Of those three different kinds of taxable or tax status accounts, which one of those accounts do you take from first to satisfy your discretionary or necessity withdrawals? And then you have to plan for longevity. If I'm going to live 25 or 30 years in retirement, do I have enough income that's going to last me?
And out of all of these different elements that you're bringing up, what do you think keeps people from retiring the most?
So believe it or not, we talked to a lot of people that are in their late 50s or early 60s that say, you know, I may not be a multi-zillionaire, but I have enough money that I've accumulated if it weren't for healthcare. So the answer to your question is healthcare or Medicare. So where are they going to get their healthcare piece when they step away from their employer?
Mark from Market Medicare Advisors. You want to talk a little bit about some of the Medicare planning you do with folks before they jump ship for a retirement?
Absolutely. It's one of those things that not everybody thinks about. They start thinking a little bit about, well, where am I going to get my health care from? But they don't start thinking about, I should plan for that. What are the costs going to be? Unfortunately, I have way too many people come into my office and they think that Medicare doesn't cost them anything, that there will be no cost. And sometimes it's because they know people who don't have to pay anything. Usually it's because they have an extremely low income. But things they need to take into consideration is, what is my timeline? When will I be eligible? Typically, they're eligible 90 days prior to the day of their birth before they come 65 or 90 days after. They also need to consider the thing about special enrollment periods, like what if I want to continue to work? What if my spouse works? Can I enroll later? They need to think about that, what those things might cover. They also need to think about what kind of coverage that they want. Do they want a supplement coverage? They pay one monthly fee and all of the things all their healthcare costs are taken care of? Or do they want to go with a Medicare Advantage plan that gives them a little bit more peace of mind, that maybe they don't have to spend as much outright out of their pocket, but it's going to take care of some of their long-term needs. They also need to take into consideration things like penalties, IRMA considerations, income adjustments. If they're making money over the limits and have to make an adjustment which would possibly cost them more, that definitely falls on the financial planning side, but it fits directly with the Medicare planning. Then of course they have to be concerned about late penalties. What if I don't enroll in time? What if I miss my dates? How long is that going to go? How are they going to coordinate with their employer coverage? Right? Can I continue to work? My employer have a plan that requires me to go on portions of Medicare at certain points? And some employer plans do, some don't. What are the requirements to go on my spouse's plan? Can my spouse come on my plan? All those things need to be spoke about. They need to be integrated into a plan together. So going forward, they know exactly what those costs and what those options are, which gives a lot of people a peace of mind to be able to say, hey, Danny, I'm ready to retire now.
When someone goes to build a skyscraper, they don't just walk up one day and start building. They have a plan, a blueprint. They choose the materials they're going to use, decide how tall it will be, and retirement is no different. It takes a good plan to make sure your retirement doesn't fall apart on you. Do you have a good plan? Sometimes all it takes to find out is a 15-minute phone conversation. To set up the introductory phone call, just reach out at 833-44-CORE4. That's 833-442-6734, or go to our website at retirementhelp.com. That's our online resource we built to educate people just like you about all things retirement. When we come back, we'll be continuing building these blocks with estate planning. Stay tuned. Welcome back into Eye on Retirement. Last segment, we were talking about how to build a solid retirement plan. Danny, what is the next building block you usually look at with folks?
So we talked about healthcare in our last block, that a lot of people have becomes a big barrier for them to jump over into retirement. But another one that we talk about is estate planning, or legacy, if you will. And a lot of times people will miss that. They'll build up their income, they'll do all the things that they need to do, as far as maybe they even do some tax planning, but they don't do the estate planning. They say, well, whatever happens, that'll be someone else's problem. So this is where we like to look towards Alex.
Alex from Eidelman Law Firm.
Yeah, so you're right. I think a lot of times people overlook their estate planning when they're looking at retirement and taking care of all of the things they need to do as they begin to age and get to the later stages of life. And everyone needs to have certain core elements of their estate plan in place just to make sure that even during their lifetime they're taken care of. One of those are powers of attorney. So powers of attorney for finance and powers of attorney for healthcare are important and really critical for every single person to have. Because if you don't have that set up and now you're incapacitated, whether you've had a heart attack or a stroke or in a car wreck or some other unforeseen incident, you need to have someone in place already that is chosen by you to take care of you in those circumstances. Because if you don't, your loved ones are going to be forced to go to court to get guardianship and conservatorship, and that can cost thousands of dollars and take up to 6 to 8 weeks in court. And that's not an additional burden that you want to place on your loved ones when they're already dealing with something terrible happening to you. The next element is to have something called a living will. When I talk to people about a living will, I'd say 99% of them want that. It's just the document that says, hey, if the doctors are going to place me on invasive life support, and it's not to keep me around, it's not to do anything other than to kind of run out the clock, that you don't want that. And so that's another consideration. If you want to save your family time and grief and money on, if you're in a situation where you're going to be stuck in the hospital for months on end, but there's no chance of you coming back. And then the final kind of core piece of that is the will. So the will is the document that says, here's all my assets, here's where I want them to go, and here's how I want that to be distributed. Now that has to go through the court system. It's a process called probate, but just having that allows you to have a baseline of knowing what's going to happen to your assets at your passing, and hopefully allow for everyone in your family to know that as well. Now, we also talk about how to title your assets so that they pass without having to go through probate. So your retirement accounts, all your bank accounts, all of those things can have either transferable on death or payable on death to make that an easier process for them to go through. Sometimes that isn't good enough, and so we need to look at having a trust. And trusts come in two basic flavors. We have revocable and irrevocable. And those are basically designations that allow us to either make changes or to lock everything down. And we do that to make sure that we can save some assets from going through the Medicaid process, whether they're saying you're ineligible because those assets aren't within their limits, or because they're saying now we need those assets from you after your passing to take care of all the money that they've spent on your care while you were alive. And most people I found don't want to do that. So we can sit down and chat through options to preserve your assets for your children or for your family and not give them to Medicaid or to the government. And then finally, the last thing that we want to talk about is kind of that charitable aspect. I have a lot of clients who've worked hard their entire life. They know that their children are well off, that they don't need a ton of assets. They don't need a lot of their help moving forward. And they know that there's agencies out there, nonprofits or church groups or whatever they are passionate about that need assets. And so we can sit there and chat through that and figure out what makes sense in terms of taxes. Can they get a tax break for their estate? What can they do in terms of making sure those assets last for a long time for those charities that they're wanting to be involved with? Or even, we've talked in the past about having a pet trust or something like that to take care of the things that they love in life that aren't necessarily just their immediate family. So all of those things interplay with all of the other groups that we have. We talk about the healthcare power of attorney, and so we look at Medicare, and we look at how that interplays with what they're doing. And if the agent, the person who's in charge of them, if something happens, if they understand Medicare, and if they don't, we connect them so that they understand what decisions they need to make. We talk about tax planning with Josh and making sure that if they're needing to take an RMD on the backside, we know how that's going to affect their children and what that does for their planning. And so all of these areas are interconnected, but if you don't have any one of them, and especially from my perspective, estate planning, it can trip you up and cause you and your family additional grief and additional burdens on top of already losing a loved one.
It's easy to put off estate planning. Most people just don't want to think about it. But by putting off the planning, it could make your heirs much more uncomfortable than they need to be. To set up a 15-minute introductory phone call to get your estate plan started, just reach out at 833-44-CORE4. That's 833-442-6734. Or go to our website at retirementhelp.com. There you can also watch past episodes or submit a question for us to possibly answer in a future episode. When we come back, we'll put on the finishing touches with taxes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Eye on Retirement. Danny, we've talked about income. We've talked about Medicare, estate planning, but I'm pretty sure there's one big element missing from this conversation.
Well, there is, and that speaks loudly of taxes. And so there's a famous CPA that I often will cite. His name is Ed Slott. He's out of Baltimore, Maryland. He writes lots of different books on the subject of taxes. And his most recent book, he talks about how whether you're 5 years away from retirement or 50, the single biggest thing facing you is taxes. And so with the talking about taxes and the impact that taxes will have on someone's retirement plan, if you miss that piece, then you've missed a large portion of the whole puzzle. He says that taxes, or that money lost to the stock market, so the stock market goes up, the stock market goes down, up and down, up and down. You may have money lost in the stock market that may come back depending on what you invest in and how much time you have. But money lost to taxes never returns. Joshua, talk to us about taxes and that piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, so taxes deals with so many of these different parts individually and all together. So we first started talking about income sources, right? And so tax planning comes in there. You know, Social Security has its own formula that specifies how much of it is included in your taxable income. When people hit 73, 75, required distributions come onto the scene, and they're going to have their own tax consequences, which can impact the taxation of Social Security we just talked about. So those two things have to be dealt with as you're setting up this income plan. And oh yeah, people don't like paying a lot of taxes when they file the returns. We probably should figure out what withholdings look like, because Social Security, RMDs have their own levers to adjust to get that to where they want to be. And then on that RMD issue, those are coming out of people's nest egg, right? And then their accounts, and there's different kinds of accounts that make up that nest egg like you were talking about. So there's going to be those fully taxable accounts. That could be anything from plain vanilla savings account to some hotshot brokerage account, and they're going to have their own rules and their own hang-ups that need to be adjusted for in this tax plan. Is it interest coming out of a CD? Well, that's going to impact how much taxable income they have, but there's no withholding component. That needs to be accounted for. Do they have lots of funds in traditional IRAs or 401ks? If so, maybe we need to talk about a series of like Roth conversions to try to deal with that before it becomes a big problem. Whittle down those required distributions, get some tax-free growth, because who doesn't want some tax-free growth, right? And then they've got the Roth accounts, so then we save those maybe for big purchases, and maybe we don't need that for cash flow, maybe we do. But it's that coordinated, individualized tax plan that is the key issue there. We talked a little bit about Roth conversions there. On those taxable accounts, do they have big gains in there? Is there some losses we can recognize to offset those gains and kind of balance it out a little bit, thereby letting them free up cash? Maybe they need it for cash flow. Maybe they need it for just rebalancing risk tolerances and all that fun stuff. And then...
Did you say fun?
Well, it was tongue-in-cheek.
Making sure.
And then remember, okay, so we just had this new tax law that passed, and it's got permanent lower tax rates, but hopefully you notice the air quotes there. Things are only permanent in the tax code until somebody else decides to change it. Yes. Other pieces of the new tax law do sunset at the end of 28, so it's only for a limited time. A good tax plan is going to account for those limited time options and the fact that taxes could well go up in the future. So we need to make sure that people have the options, they can pivot as needed.
Danny, there are all these different elements to retirement. What if my tax advisor isn't talking to my financial advisor?
Well, then likely there's a hole in your plan. And we often will ask people this question: if there was something that this team of professionals knew that was going to cost you thousands of dollars either now or in the future, and you didn't know that, when would you like for us to tell you that? And so you want to make sure that you're integrating all four of these components that we've talked about today. because you want to make sure that you have a coordinated approach to your retirement plan. Understand how income, understand how taxes, understand how healthcare, understand how estate decisions interact with each other, and making sure that you may have a great plan, but it's always worth a second look, having someone look at that for you. You may want to we want to do annual reviews with our clients. We want to make sure that we adjust for market changes, because the market doesn't stay static. It goes, sometimes it's rip-roaring to the high side, sometimes it has a big decline to the downside. Sometimes you want to make sure that you're looking at your health status every year, making sure that your health care choices for the next 12 months are going to be more in line with both your health and your quality of life at that period of time. And then, as Joshua talks about, you're also going to want to look in that fourth quarter, do a tax approach, seeing what's changed in the tax code in this current year that's going to affect you that you could take advantage of. If you're not having that collaboration, how do you know what you're missing? You want that professional team collaboration between a financial advisor, a CPA, a tax planner, an estate attorney, a Medicare specialist. If you're having that whole team work for you and your benefits, that's where you have a truly great retirement plan.
Danny's right. It helps to have a whole team working together on your behalf. Do you have that team? To set up a 15-minute introductory phone call just to see if we're the right team for you, reach out at 833-44-CORE4. That's 833-442-6734. Or check out our website at retirementhelp.com. There you can also watch past episodes, research your retirement questions, or set up a 15-minute phone call with one of our advisors. That's all the time we have for this week. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm Trey Bassa, along with the entire panel, reminding you that we're here to keep an eye on retirement.
Investment advisory services are duly offered through Foundations Investment Advisors LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor, and Market Investment Group LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. The investment advisor representatives of Market are also affiliated with and registered through Foundations Investment Advisors LLC, and may provide services on behalf of both firms to client or prospective clients where properly licensed or exempt. This show is presented by Market Investment Group LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor that only conducts business in jurisdictions where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. Registration as an investment advisor is not an endorsement of the firm by securities regulators and does not mean that the advisor has achieved a specific level of skill or ability. The firm is not engaged in the practice of law or accounting. The information presented is believed to be current. It should not be viewed as personalized investment advice. All expressions of opinion reflect the judgment of the presenter on the date of the show's publication and are subject to change. The information presented is not an offer to buy or sell, or a solicitation of any offer to buy or sell any of the securities discussed. You should consult with a professional advisor before implementing any of the strategies discussed. Any legal or tax information provided in this show is general in nature. Always consult an attorney or tax professional regarding your specific legal or tax situation. Annuity and life insurance guarantees are subject to the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company. If you withdraw money from or surrender your contract within a certain time after investing, the insurance company may assess a surrender charge. Withdrawals may be subject to tax penalties and income taxes. Persons selling annuities and other insurance products receive compensation for these transactions. These commissions are separate and distinct from fees charged for advisory services. Insurance products also contain additional fees and expenses. Social Security rules and regulations are subject to change at any time. Always consult with your local Social Security office before acting upon any information provided herein. A Roth conversion may not be suitable for your situation. The primary goal in converting retirement assets into a Roth IRA is to reduce the future tax liability on the distributions you take in retirement or on the distributions of your beneficiaries. The information provided is to help you determine whether or not a Roth IRA conversion may be appropriate for your particular circumstances. Please review your retirement savings, tax, and legacy planning strategies with your legal/tax advisor to be sure a Roth IRA conversion fits into your planning strategies. This is not endorsed by the U.S. government or associated with any federal Medicare program. We do not offer every plan available in your area. Any information we provide is limited to those plans we do offer in your area. Please contact Medicare.gov or 1-800-Medicare to get information on all your options. All client or prospective client names have been changed to protect the identities of the individuals discussed. All rights reserved.